15-year-old Maya Phillips stood outside Miller's Corner store in Fairview, Virginia, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke urgently to the 911 operator. "I'm telling you, there are two men inside with guns. I saw them through the window. They're not customers, they're robbing the place." Officer Randy Blake's patrol car pulled up, and he stepped out with a smirk already forming on his face. He looked Maya up and down with undisguised contempt before snatching the phone from her hand and ending the call. "Another kid wasting police time," he muttered to his partner, Officer Justin Parker, who was climbing out of the passenger seat. "Officer, please listen," Maya started. "Shut it," Blake interrupted. "You kids think it's funny to make false reports? Where are your parents?" "My mom's at work." "She's FBI. If you'd just check inside the store." Blake burst out laughing. "FBI? Right. And I'm the president. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Maya Phillips had learned from an early age not to mention her mother's job casually. Special Agent Diana Phillips had been with the FBI for 18 years, currently serving as the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Critical Incident Response Group based out of the FBI's Richmond Field Office. She specialized in high-risk tactical operations, hostage situations, and organized crime investigations. Diana had risen through the ranks through a combination of exceptional skill, unwavering dedication, and the ability to remain calm under pressure that would break most people. She'd been part of operations that made national news, though her name never appeared in any articles. That's how the FBI preferred it, results without recognition. What Officer Blake didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know because he'd judged Maya within 3 seconds of seeing her, was that Diana Phillips was currently 6 blocks away, leading a multi-agency surveillance operation targeting a drug trafficking ring that had been operating in Fairview for the past 8 months. The operation had been in planning for weeks. Diana's team had identified Miller's Corner store as a frequent meeting point for mid-level dealers in the organization. They had the store under electronic surveillance, with cameras hidden in the parking lot and across the street. They were waiting for the organization's leadership to make an appearance so they could execute arrest warrants on the entire network simultaneously. Maya knew none of this, of course. Her mother kept her work life strictly separated from her home life, sharing only the vaguest details about meetings and cases without ever providing specifics. It was for Maya's safety as much as operational security. What Maya did know was that her mother had taught her to be observant, to trust her instincts, and to report suspicious activity to authorities. If you see something that doesn't feel right, Diana had told her countless times, speak up. Don't assume someone else will handle it. That's exactly what Maya had done 20 minutes ago when she'd stopped at Miller's Corner store to buy a snack on her way home from school. Through the front window, she'd seen 2 men she didn't recognize, one wearing a ski mask despite the warm Virginia afternoon, the other with a bandana covering his face, both carrying what looked like handguns. Mrs. Patricia O'Brien, the store's owner, was behind the counter with her hands raised. 2 other customers were on the floor. It was clearly a robbery in progress. Maya had immediately walked away from the store, found a safe position behind a parked car 2 buildings down, and called 911. She'd given clear, detailed information, exact address, description of the suspects, number of hostages, presence of weapons. Everything her mother had taught her about reporting emergencies. She'd expected the police to arrive quickly, assess the situation, and handle it professionally. Instead, she'd gotten Officer Randy Blake, whose first instinct upon seeing a black teenage girl on the phone was to assume she was causing problems rather than reporting them. Blake had a reputation in Fairview that Maya didn't know about but that her mother certainly did. He was one of several officers in the Fairview Police Department who had been flagged in FBI databases as potentially problematic, not because he'd been charged with anything, but because his name appeared in multiple civilian complaints and use-of-force reports that showed a disturbing pattern. Diana had actually raised concerns about Blake and others in the department during an interagency meeting 3 months ago. She'd suggested that local leadership needed to address what appeared to be systemic issues with how certain officers treated minority residents. Her concerns had been noted but not acted upon, mostly because the Fairview police chief was protective of his officers and resistant to outside criticism. Now, as Maya stood facing Officer Blake's contempt and disbelief, she wished desperately that she could call her mother directly. But Diana had taught her never to use personal connections to handle things that should go through proper channels. The system should work for everyone equally, Diana always said. The moment we start using personal influence to get special treatment, we become part of the problem. So Maya didn't mention that her mother was literally 6 blocks away with a tactical team. She didn't pull out her phone to call Diana directly. She tried to handle this the way any citizen should be able to, by reporting a crime to a police officer and expecting to be taken seriously. Officer Blake, however, had already decided that this black teenager wasn't worth his time, wasn't credible, and certainly wasn't the daughter of an FBI agent. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was about all 3 assumptions. Officer Randy Blake had been with the Fairview Police Department for 12 years, and in his mind, he'd seen it all. He'd developed what he considered excellent instincts for reading situations and people, instincts that told him this teenage girl was wasting his time with a prank call or trying to get attention. FBI, he repeated mockingly, turning to Officer Parker. Justin, you hear this? Kid's mother is FBI. He made exaggerated air quotes around the word FBI. Maya's jaw tightened with frustration. Officer Blake, if you would just look inside the store, you'd see. I'd see what? A normal convenience store on a Tuesday afternoon? Blake crossed his arms over his chest. You know what I think? I think you're one of those kids who watches too many cop shows and thinks it's fun to call 911 with fake emergencies. Officer Justin Parker shifted uncomfortably. He was newer to the force, only 3 years in, and something about this situation felt off to him. The girl seemed genuinely frightened, not like she was playing a prank. But Blake was his training officer, and Parker had learned quickly that questioning Blake's judgment led to weeks of hostile treatment. Officer, please, Maya tried again, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. There are people in danger. Mrs. O'Brien, the owner, she's being held at gunpoint. I saw it through the window. 2 armed men, one in a ski mask. A ski mask in May? Blake laughed again. You're not even trying to make your story believable. Let me guess, they were also wearing striped shirts and carrying bags with dollar signs on them? A small crowd was beginning to gather. Tyler Mitchell, a classmate of Maya's, had stopped on his way home and was watching the interaction with growing concern. Carmen Vasquez, who worked at the restaurant next door, stepped outside to see what was happening. Blake seemed to feed off the audience, his performance becoming more exaggerated. You want to know what I think is really going on here? I think you got caught shoplifting, panicked, and called 911 with some crazy story to create a distraction. That's what I think. I didn't shoplift anything. Maya's voice rose with frustration. I never even went inside because I saw the robbery happening. So now it's a robbery? Before you said armed men, now it's a robbery. Can't keep your story straight, can you? Blake stepped closer, his posture deliberately intimidating. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to admit you made a false police report, you're going to apologize for wasting everyone's time, and then I'm going to call your parents, your real parents, not your imaginary FBI mother, and we're going to discuss the consequences of filing false reports. Parker finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. Blake, maybe we should just take a quick look inside the store? Just to be sure? Blake turned on him with barely contained irritation. Parker, this is why you're still a probationary officer. You let these people manipulate you with their sob stories. This girl is lying. It's obvious to anyone with experience. He turned back to Maya. You're coming down to the station. We're going to charge you with filing a false police report, which is a misdemeanor. At your age, it'll probably mean community service and a permanent mark on your record. Hope your little prank was worth it. Maya's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was terrified, not for herself anymore, but for Mrs. O'Brien and the other people inside that store. She'd done everything right, reported what she saw clearly and accurately, and this officer refused to even check because he'd already decided she wasn't credible based on nothing but his own prejudice. "My mother is Special Agent Diana Phillips," Maya said, her voice shaking with emotion but clear. "She works for the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group. If you would just verify that, or let me call her." "Enough." Blake grabbed Maya's arm roughly. "You're under arrest for filing a false police report and obstructing an officer. You have the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you start doing right now." As he reached for his handcuffs, Officer Parker's radio crackled to life. It was dispatch, and the message would change everything. "All units, we have a confirmed armed robbery in progress at Miller's Corner Store, 847, Bradford Avenue. FBI Task Force is requesting immediate backup. Repeat, FBI Task Force on scene requesting local PD backup." Blake froze, his hand still gripping Maya's arm, as the color slowly drained from his face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a long moment, Officer Blake stood perfectly still, his hand still gripping Maya's arm, as the dispatch message echoed through his radio. Officer Parker reached for his own radio, but Blake shot him a warning look. "Stand down, Parker," Blake said, his voice tight. He released Maya's arm but pointed a finger in her face. "Don't move." He stepped away, turning his back to Maya and speaking into his radio in a low voice. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We're already on scene at Miller's Corner Store. Situation is under control. No armed robbery. Just a teenage girl making false reports. Please cancel FBI backup request." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "They just confirmed there's a robbery." "I said be quiet." Blake snapped at her before returning to his radio. "Dispatch, confirm cancellation of backup request. We have assessed the scene. No emergency exists." There was a pause, then dispatch responded, confusion evident in the operator's voice. "Unit 12, please clarify. We have FBI surveillance reporting armed suspects inside the location. Are you saying FBI intel is incorrect?" Blake's jaw clenched. He was in too deep now to back down without admitting he'd been wrong, that he'd ignored Maya's legitimate report, that he'd nearly arrested the person who had actually been trying to help. His pride and his pattern of never admitting mistakes had backed him into a corner. "Affirmative, dispatch. FBI intel is incorrect for this location. Probably got their wires crossed. No armed suspects present. Store is operating normally." He paused, then added with calculated malice, "We do have one individual here filing false reports and claiming to be related to FBI personnel. Possibly mentally disturbed. Requesting social services response for juvenile." Officer Parker looked at Blake with undisguised shock. "Blake, what are you doing?" "Dispatch just said FBI has surveillance on this location. If they're saying there's an armed robbery." "Parker, I'm the senior officer here, and I'm telling you what I see with my own eyes. An empty parking lot, a quiet store, and a teenager with an overactive imagination." Blake's voice had taken on a harder edge. "You want to make sergeant someday? Then you back my play here." Parker hesitated, trapped between what he was hearing on the radio and loyalty to his training officer. Finally, against his better judgment, he nodded reluctantly. Tyler Mitchell, Maya's classmate, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is crazy," he muttered, but loud enough for the officers to hear. "She called in a robbery, and you're arresting her?" Blake spun toward Tyler. "Put that phone away right now, or you'll be joining her in the back of my patrol car." Carmen Vasquez, who had been watching from the restaurant doorway, stepped forward. "Officer, I've worked next door to that store for 6 years. Mrs. O'Brien always has her open sign facing out and her door propped open on warm days. Look, the sign is turned around and the door is closed. That's not normal." Blake barely glanced at the store. Maybe she stepped out. Maybe she's doing inventory. There are 100 normal explanations. Or maybe, Maya said, her voice stronger now despite her fear, "there are armed men inside holding her hostage, exactly like I reported. And while you're standing here calling me a liar, they could be hurting people." Blake turned back to Maya, his expression hardening into something cruel. "You know what your problem is? You've been taught that you can say whatever you want, make whatever accusations you want, and people will believe you because you'll just cry racism or discrimination if anyone questions you. Well, not today. Not with me." He grabbed Maya's arm again, harder this time. "You're coming to the station, and we're going to have a very long conversation about the consequences of lying to police officers. And when your real parents show up, not your FBI fantasy mother, they're going to be very disappointed in you." Officer Parker's radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice, calm, professional, and carrying unmistakable authority. "Fairview PD Unit 12, this is FBI Special Agent Diana Phillips, Assistant Special Agent in charge, Critical Incident Response Group. I am ordering you to release that juvenile immediately and clear the area. We have armed suspects in that store, and you are compromising an active federal operation. Acknowledge immediately." Officer Blake's hand slowly released Maya's arm as the blood drained from his face for the second time in 5 minutes. Maya looked at Blake with an expression that mixed vindication with disappointment. "That's my mom," she said quietly. "I tried to tell you." 6 blocks away, in a nondescript surveillance van parked behind an auto repair shop, Special Agent Diana Phillips stood in front of a bank of monitors showing multiple camera angles of Miller's Corner store. Her tactical vest was already strapped on, her sidearm secured, and her team of 12 FBI agents was conducting final equipment checks for the operation they'd been planning for weeks. The operation had been going perfectly until 17 minutes ago when their surveillance caught 2 unidentified males entering Miller's Corner store wearing masks and carrying firearms. These weren't their targets, the high-level drug traffickers they'd been waiting for. These were opportunistic criminals who had chosen the worst possible time and location to commit armed robbery. Diana had immediately called it in, requesting local PD backup to secure the perimeter while her team assessed whether to intervene or wait for the primary targets. The last thing she'd expected was for the responding officer to claim there was no emergency. And she certainly hadn't expected that responding officer to have her daughter detained. Agent Chris Yamamoto, her second in command, stepped beside her. "Boss, that's Maya on the body cam feed." He pointed to one of the monitors showing Officer Blake's perspective. "She must have been in the area when this started." Diana's jaw clenched as she watched Blake grab her daughter's arm and threaten her with arrest. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to break protocol, to reveal herself immediately, to protect her child. But 18 years in the FBI had taught her the critical importance of staying calm and following procedure, especially, when emotions were running high. "Agent Yamamoto, get me a direct line to that officer's radio," Diana said, her voice controlled but edged with steel. "And get Tactical Team 1 mobilized. If we have civilians in immediate danger, we're going in." She watched the monitor as Maya tried repeatedly to explain what she'd seen, only to be dismissed and mocked. Diana's fingers tightened around the edge of the console, her knuckles going white. Agent Jennifer Briggs, the team's tactical coordinator, approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, I've pulled the personnel file on the responding officer, Randy Blake. He's got quite a history. 14 civilian complaints over 12 years, 8 involving accusations of racial bias. 3 excessive force allegations, all found to be unsubstantiated by the department." "Of course they were," Diana muttered, still watching the monitor. She'd seen this pattern too many times in too many departments. Problematic officers protected by weak leadership in a system designed to shield rather than scrutinize. Agent Marcus Stone, who was monitoring the store's interior surveillance, spoke up urgently. "Ma'am, we've got movement inside. One suspect is getting agitated. He's waving his weapon at the hostages. This situation could go bad very quickly." Diana made a split-second decision. The drug trafficking operation they'd been planning for weeks was now secondary to the immediate threat to civilian lives, including Mrs. O'Brien, whom Diana knew personally from dozens of stops at that store over the years. "All teams, prepare for tactical entry, Diana ordered, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. We're going in. Rules of engagement are standard: protect civilian lives, neutralize threats, secure suspects. Yamamoto, coordinate with local SWAT. Briggs, get me updated positions on all civilians inside. She turned to Agent Sarah Kim, her communications specialist. Get me a direct line to that officer right now. Patch it through his radio so everyone can hear. As Kim worked to establish the connection, Diana pulled up the body cam footage again. She watched Blake tell Maya that her problem was making accusations and expecting people to believe her. She watched him grab her daughter's arm with unnecessary force. Diana's expression remained professionally neutral, but anyone who knew her well would have recognized the particular stillness that came over her when she was absolutely furious and completely in control. "Ma'am, you're connected," Agent Kim said, handing her the radio. Diana pressed the transmit button, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the FBI van, through the radio network, and directly into Officer Blake's ear. "Fairview PD Unit 12, this is FBI Special Agent Diana Phillips, Assistant Special Agent in charge, Critical Incident Response Group. I am ordering you to release that juvenile immediately and clear the area. We have armed suspects in that store, and you are compromising an active federal operation. Acknowledge immediately." She released the button and waited, watching Blake's face on the monitor as her words hit him like a physical blow. "Tactical teams, mount up," Diana said to her assembled agents. "We're rolling in 60 seconds. And someone get local PD command on the phone. We need to have a very serious conversation about Officer Blake's future with law enforcement." Agent Yamamoto glanced at her. "You want me to handle the local PD coordination? Given that your daughter is involved, there might be conflict of interest concerns." Diana met his eyes. "My daughter reported a crime, was ignored and threatened with arrest by an officer who refused to do his job. There's no conflict of interest in expecting police to investigate legitimate reports. But yes, you handle the coordination. I'll be leading the tactical entry team." She pulled on her helmet and checked her weapon one final time. "Let's go save some lives and have a conversation with Officer Blake about accountability." As the FBI tactical team moved out toward Miller's Corner store, Diana allowed herself one moment of pride in her daughter. Maya had done everything exactly right, observed, reported, stayed safe, and tried to work through the system even when the system failed her. Now it was time for Diana to show Officer Blake exactly what happened when someone underestimated the Phillips family. Officer Blake stood motionless in the parking lot, his radio still crackling with static after Special Agent Phillips's transmission. His hand had released Maya's arm automatically when he heard the words FBI Special Agent, but his brain was still trying to process what had just happened. Officer Parker grabbed Blake's arm. "Blake, did she just say she's the girl's mother? Did you hear that? FBI ASAC, that's Assistant Special Agent in charge. That's like 3 levels below the director. And she said we're compromising an active federal operation." Blake's face had gone from red to pale to a sickly gray color. His eyes darted between Maya, the corner store, and his radio, as if hoping one of them would tell him this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything other than what it obviously was. "She's bluffing," Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's a coincidence. Someone with the same last name probably." "Officer Blake," Maya interrupted, her voice steady now despite everything that had just happened. "My mother is Special Agent Diana Phillips. She's been with the FBI for 18 years. She specializes in tactical operations. And she's been running a drug trafficking investigation in Fairview for the past 8 months. You can verify all of this." The color drained completely from Blake's face. 8 months, he repeated slowly. "The FBI has been investigating in my jurisdiction for 8 months?" Carmen Vasquez, still standing at the restaurant doorway, spoke up. "Officer, I hate to add to your problems, but I just looked through the window. Mrs. O'Brien is behind the counter with 2 men I don't recognize. One of them is holding something, it might be a gun." The girl was telling the truth. Parker immediately moved toward the store, his hand going to his service weapon, but froze when Blake grabbed his arm. "Wait," Blake said, his mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. "Just wait. We need to think about this." "Think about what?" Parker pulled his arm free, staring at his training officer with dawning horror. "Blake, there are people in danger. The FBI has confirmed it. The girl was right. We need to act now." Blake's radio crackled again. This time it was his own dispatch, and the operator's voice was sharp with urgency. "Unit 12, FBI Command is reporting you have not complied with their order to clear the area. Repeat, clear the area immediately. FBI tactical teams are en route. ETA 90 seconds. Tyler Mitchell, still recording on his phone, spoke from behind them. "This is insane. You're actually going to let your ego get people killed?" Blake spun toward Tyler, his face flushed with anger and panic. "Turn that phone off right now. This is an active police situation." "No," Tyler said firmly, holding the phone higher. "This is an active FBI situation that you're interfering with. And I'm documenting everything in case something happens to these people because you refuse to listen." In the distance, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed could be heard. No sirens, but the distinctive roar of heavy SUVs moving fast. Officer Parker made a decision. He stepped away from Blake and spoke into his own radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Parker, Unit 12. I am clearing the immediate area as ordered by FBI Command. My partner appears to be having difficulty understanding the severity of the situation." "Blake, we need to move," Parker said, his voice urgent. "Whatever you're worried about, your pride, your record, getting written up, none of that matters if people die because we didn't secure this scene properly." Blake looked at the corner store, then at Maya, then at the approaching vehicles. His radio crackled once more, and this time the voice was different, deeper, carrying even more authority. "This is Tactical Commander James Liu, FBI Hostage Rescue Team. All non-federal personnel clear the area immediately. We are assuming tactical control of this scene. Officer Blake, you are ordered to stand down and report to your commanding officer. Acknowledge immediately." 3 massive black SUVs turned the corner, followed by a tactical van. They moved with practiced precision, forming a perimeter around Miller's corner store. As they came to a stop, armed FBI agents in full tactical gear began deploying with military efficiency. The lead SUV's door opened, and Special Agent Maya Phillips stepped out. She was wearing full tactical gear, vest, helmet, rifle slung across her chest, and moved with the confident purpose of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her eyes locked onto Officer Blake, and even from 20 feet away, her expression made it clear that this conversation was far from over. Then her eyes found Maya, and for just a moment, the hard professional mask cracked. Diana gave her daughter the smallest nod, a gesture that communicated both relief that she was safe and pride that she'd handled herself well. Officer Blake finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she was FBI." Diana approached, her tactical team fanning out behind her to secure the perimeter. When she spoke, her voice was cold and professional. "Officer Blake, you didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't verify. You didn't investigate. You saw a black teenage girl reporting a crime, and you immediately assumed she was lying." She gestured toward the store, where her team was now preparing for tactical entry. "While you were threatening to arrest my daughter for telling the truth, armed criminals were holding innocent people hostage 50 feet away. Your failure to do your job has endangered civilian lives and compromised a federal investigation." She turned to Agent Yamamoto. "Get Officer Blake's badge number and unit information. I'll be filing a formal complaint with his department, and I want a full review of how he handled this call." Blake's hand trembled as he reached for his badge, the reality of his situation finally, fully sinking in. Special Agent Maya Phillips stood in the parking lot of Miller's corner store, her tactical team moving around her with practiced efficiency as they prepared for entry. She kept her gaze locked on Officer Blake, who looked like he was trying to disappear into the asphalt. Agent Yamamoto, Diana called out without breaking eye contact with Blake, please escort Officer Blake to a position behind our outer perimeter. He's interfered enough with this operation. Before Blake could respond, Diana turned her attention to her daughter. She walked over to Maya, her expression softening just slightly. Are you hurt? Maya shook her head. No, Mom. I'm okay. But Mrs. O'Brien is inside with at least 2 armed men. I tried to tell him, she gestured toward Blake, but he wouldn't listen. Diana placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You did exactly right. Clear report, stayed at a safe distance, tried to work through proper channels. I'm proud of you. She squeezed gently. Now I need you to move behind our perimeter with Agent Briggs. She'll take your statement and keep you safe while we handle this. Mom, I'm sorry if I messed up your operation. You didn't mess up anything, Diana interrupted firmly. You potentially saved lives by calling this in quickly. These suspects aren't connected to our primary investigation, just bad timing and bad luck. Now go with Agent Briggs. As Maya was escorted to safety, Diana returned her focus to the tactical situation. Agent Marcus Stone approached with an updated layout of the store's interior on a tablet. Ma'am, we have visual confirmation of 2 suspects and 4 civilians inside. Mrs. O'Brien behind the counter, 2 customers on the floor near the back, and 1 customer near the front who appears to be trying to stay out of sight. Both suspects are armed, one with what looks like a 9mm handgun, the other with a revolver. They're arguing with each other. Body language suggests they're amateurs, probably didn't expect anyone to be in the store. Diana studied the screen. Exits? Front door, back door through the stockroom, and an emergency exit on the west side. All are on our coverage. They're trapped, they just don't know it yet. Tactical Commander Liu approached, his team assembled and ready. We're prepared for dynamic entry on your command, Agent Phillips. Alternatively, we can establish communication and attempt negotiation. Diana considered the options. Through her tactical training and years of experience, she could read the situation on the monitors. The suspects were agitated, unpredictable, and arguing, classic signs of amateurs and over their heads. That made them dangerous not because they were skilled, but because they were likely to panic and make fatal mistakes. We negotiate first, Diana decided. Stone, get me a line into the store. Liu, position your team for rapid entry if negotiation fails. I want this resolved with 0 civilian casualties. She turned to where Officer Blake was standing with Agent Yamamoto, deliberately raising her voice so Blake could hear. And someone document that our priority is preserving civilian lives, not proving a point or protecting egos. That's what actual police work looks like. The point landed like a punch. Blake visibly flinched. Within 2 minutes, Agent Stone had established a phone connection to the store. One of the suspects answered, his voice shaking with adrenaline and fear. Who is this? What do you want? Diana's voice shifted into her negotiator tone, calm, steady, authoritative but not threatening. This is FBI Special Agent Diana Phillips. I'm the person in charge out here. What's your name? I'm not telling you my name. We've got hostages. We've got guns. Don't try anything or people get hurt. I understand you have people in there with you, Diana continued, her voice remarkably patient. And I want to make sure everyone, including you, walks out of there safely today. But I need you to help me understand what you need. What brought you to this situation? Over the next 15 minutes, Diana worked methodically to establish rapport with the suspect, who she learned was named Danny, a 23-year-old with a drug problem and mounting debts who had made the catastrophically poor decision to rob a convenience store with his cousin. Officer Parker, who had been watching the FBI operation with growing respect and awareness, leaned toward Blake and whispered, "This is how it's supposed to be done. Professional. By the book. No ego." Blake said nothing, but his face showed he was beginning to comprehend the magnitude of his failure. Diana continued the negotiation, her team ready to act instantly if things went wrong, her eyes occasionally flicking to the perimeter where Maya stood safely behind the tactical line. "Danny, I'm going to make you a promise," Diana said into the phone. "If you put down your weapons and let those people walk out safely, no one gets hurt today. Not the hostages, not you, not your cousin. You made some bad choices that got you here, but you can still make good choices that get you out safely. What do you say?" There was a long pause, the sound of muffled conversation on the other end of the line. Finally, Danny's voice came back, shaking but resolute. "Okay. Okay. We're coming out. Please don't shoot us." "We won't shoot you if you follow my instructions exactly," Diana assured him. "Here's what's going to happen." 10 minutes later, both suspects walked out of Miller's Corner store with their hands raised, followed by 4 shaken but unharmed civilians including Mrs. O'Brien. 0 shots fired. 0 casualties. Textbook crisis resolution. As FBI agents secured the suspects and EMTs checked the former hostages, Diana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Then she turned her attention back to Officer Blake, and her expression hardened once again. "Now," she said, walking toward him with purpose, "let's discuss why you ignored my daughter's legitimate emergency call and nearly got people killed." After the suspects were in custody and the scene secured, Special Agent Maya Phillips stood in the parking lot of Miller's Corner store. The setting sun cast long shadows across what could have been a tragedy, but had instead become a brutal lesson in the cost of incompetence. Captain Robert Hayes, shift supervisor for the Fairview Police Department, arrived within minutes. His face tightened as Diana explained what had happened. "Let me make sure I understand this," Hayes said, voice low with anger. Officer Blake responded to a 911 call about an armed robbery. The caller, a juvenile, gave detailed information about suspects and hostages. Blake accused her of filing a false report, tried to arrest her, and canceled backup. "That is correct," Diana confirmed. She played Blake's body camera footage. The video showed him dismissing Maya's report, mocking her claim that her mother was FBI, and treating her as a nuisance. Hayes's jaw clenched. When the footage reached the part where Blake told dispatch there was no emergency, he shook his head. "This is indefensible. Agent Phillips, I apologize on behalf of the department. This isn't how we train our officers." Diana's tone was steady. "With respect, Captain, this is exactly how your department trained him. Or failed to." She brought up a file on her tablet. "Officer Blake has 14 civilian complaints in 12 years, 12 from minority residents. 8 allege racial bias." Hayes looked uneasy. "Those complaints were investigated. Most unsubstantiated. By an internal affairs process designed to protect officers, not citizens," Diana replied. February 2019, Blake stopped a black surgeon driving home, detained him 45 minutes, searched his car, released him only after legal threats. June 2020, he detained an entire Latino party, threatened deportation, called ICE. September 2021, he arrested a polite black teen for resisting arrest. All deemed within policy. She looked up. "That's a pattern, Captain. A decade of misconduct ignored." Officer Parker, Blake's recent partner, stepped forward. "Sir, I've seen behavior that made me uncomfortable. When I tried to report it, I was told to show loyalty. That speaking up would hurt my career." Hayes turned toward him, grave. "You were discouraged from reporting misconduct?" "Yes, sir," Parker said. "It's a culture here, protecting each other over accountability." Diana nodded. "Exactly. This isn't about one officer. It's about a system that let him thrive. And today, it almost got civilians killed." She gestured toward the store, where Mrs. O'Brien and others were being interviewed. "They were held at gunpoint for 20 minutes because Blake dismissed a legitimate call. My daughter did everything right, and was threatened with arrest for it." Agent Yamamoto approached with data. "Ma'am, we analyzed Blake's arrests. 347 in 5 years, 289 involved people of color. 44% of those cases were dismissed or ended in acquittals. Diana turned to Hayes. That's not enforcement. That's profiling. And your department's failures protected him. Hayes set down the tablet, pale. Agent Phillips, what are you asking for? I'm not asking, she said coldly. The FBI is opening a civil rights investigation into Blake in the Fairview Police Department. We'll review every arrest, every use of force report, every unsubstantiated complaint. And I'll personally file a federal complaint against Blake for interfering with a federal investigation and violating my daughter's civil rights. Blake, standing nearby, finally spoke. I didn't know she was your daughter. If you had, you'd have done your job. Diana cut in sharply. That's the problem. You judged her credibility in 3 seconds, because of her age and the color of her skin. Blake swallowed hard. I made a mistake. But I've been a good officer for 12 years. You've been a protected officer, Diana said. A good one treats everyone with respect. You've done the opposite. Captain Hayes stepped forward. Officer Blake, you're suspended effective immediately. Hand over your badge and weapon. Blake obeyed silently, pale and shaking. Captain, Diana continued, I'll be recommending that the Department of Justice place your department under a consent decree. Your internal affairs process is broken, your training insufficient, and your leadership complicit. Tyler Mitchell, a bystander, approached nervously. Agent Phillips? I recorded what happened before you arrived. I'll give it to the FBI. Diana nodded. Agent Briggs will take your statement. Thank you for having the courage to document it. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. O'Brien approached, voice trembling. Agent Phillips, your daughter saved my life. If she hadn't called. Diana's composure cracked slightly. Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Maya did what I taught her, see something, say something, and trust the system. The system failed her today, but she never stopped trying to help. As night fell over Fairview, the FBI processed the scene, securing every detail of both the robbery and Blake's failure. The story would soon make national news, another example of why reform was no longer optional. For Diana Phillips, though, it wasn't about headlines. Her daughter had done everything right, and was nearly punished for it. She wouldn't let that stand. Not for Maya. Not for anyone. 3 months after the incident at Miller's Corner store, Officer Randy Blake sat in a federal courthouse in Richmond, Virginia, facing charges that would determine the rest of his life. The courtroom was packed with media, civil rights advocates, and citizens from Fairview who had come to witness accountability finally being delivered. Federal Judge Thomas Morrison presided over the proceedings, his expression grave as he reviewed the extensive evidence compiled by the FBI's investigation. The charges against Blake were severe: deprivation of civil rights under color of law, interfering with a federal investigation, and reckless endangerment. U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh stood to present the government's case. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Officer Randy Blake engaged in a pattern of racially motivated misconduct spanning 12 years. The incident involving Maya Phillips was not an isolated mistake, it was the inevitable result of systemic prejudice that Officer Blake's department failed to address despite numerous warning signs. She pulled up the first piece of evidence on the courtroom monitors, the body camera footage from that afternoon in May. The courtroom watched in silence as Blake snatched the phone from Maya's hand, mocked her report, and dismissed her claims without any investigation. Officer Blake made a decision about Maya Phillips's credibility within seconds of seeing her, Walsh continued. He saw a black teenage girl and immediately assumed she was lying, wasting his time, or seeking attention. He never considered that she might be telling the truth about armed suspects holding hostages 50 feet away. The prosecution spent the next 2 hours systematically presenting evidence: Blake's complaint history, his arrest statistics showing clear racial disparities, testimony from victims of his previous misconduct, and expert analysis of his pattern of behavior. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, a criminologist specializing in police misconduct, testified about Blake's statistical profile. Officer Blake's arrest rate for people of color was 487% higher than the departmental average, yet his conviction rate was 40% lower. This pattern indicates he was not identifying actual criminal behavior but rather targeting individuals based on race and then attempting to justify those stops through arrests that frequently failed to result in convictions. Victim after victim took the stand, describing their encounters with Blake. The surgeon who was detained for 45 minutes for driving while black in an affluent neighborhood. The Latino family threatened with deportation despite being American citizens. The black teenager arrested for asking why he was being stopped. Maya Phillips testified about her experience, her voice clear and steady despite the packed courtroom. I reported a crime exactly as I was taught to do. I provided specific information about armed suspects and hostages. Officer Blake's response was to mock me, threaten me with arrest, and tell dispatch there was no emergency. While he was doing that, Mrs. O'Brien and 3 other people were being held at gunpoint. Diana Phillips also testified, though she maintained professional composure throughout. As an FBI agent with 18 years of experience, I can state definitively that Officer Blake's response to my daughter's report violated every principle of proper law enforcement. He failed to investigate, failed to verify, and failed to prioritize civilian safety. His prejudice nearly resulted in multiple deaths. Blake's defense attorney, Michael Torres, attempted to argue that his client had made an error in judgment under stressful circumstances, but the overwhelming evidence of a pattern made that defense untenable. Officer Blake has acknowledged he made mistakes, Torres argued weakly. But criminal charges seem excessive for what was essentially a failure to properly assess a situation. Judge Morrison interrupted. Counsel, this was not a failure to assess a situation. This was a deliberate choice to ignore a legitimate emergency report based on racial prejudice, followed by an attempt to arrest the person who made that report, followed by lying to dispatch about the situation, followed by interfering with a federal operation. That's not an error in judgment, that's criminal conduct. The judge turned to address Blake directly. Officer Blake, you held a position of public trust. Citizens are supposed to be able to call 911 and expect that responding officers will take their reports seriously, investigate appropriately, and prioritize public safety. You failed on all counts. He consulted the sentencing guidelines. The federal sentencing range for your offenses, given the aggravating factors and your documented pattern of similar behavior, would typically be 18 to 24 months in federal prison. Blake's face went pale, and his attorney gripped his arm supportively. However, Judge Morrison continued, I've reviewed the victim impact statements, including from Mrs. Patricia O'Brien, who survived the hostage situation that you failed to respond to appropriately. I've also considered the testimony from Officer Justin Parker about the culture of silence and protection in your department that enabled your misconduct. The judge paused, letting the tension build. Officer Blake, you are hereby sentenced to 20 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity in any jurisdiction. Your police certification is revoked, and you are prohibited from carrying a firearm. Blake slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally, fully hitting him. Furthermore, Judge Morrison added, I am ordering you to pay restitution in the amount of $50,000 to be distributed among the victims of your misconduct who have come forward as part of this investigation. This represents compensation for the harm, distress, and violation of civil rights you inflicted through your pattern of racially motivated policing. The judge's voice hardened. Officer Blake, you had 12 years to change your behavior. You had 14 complaints filed against you. You had multiple opportunities to learn, to grow, to become a better officer. Instead, you continued to abuse your authority, confident that your department would protect you from consequences. Today, that protection ends. Judge Morrison lifted his gavel. You told Maya Phillips that day that she needed to learn her place. I hope you spend your time in federal prison learning yours, which is as a cautionary tale about what happens when prejudice, pride, and protected misconduct finally face accountability. The gavel came down with finality. As Blake was led away by federal marshals, Diana Phillips sat in the gallery with her arm around Maya. Justice had been served, but both knew this was just one case, one officer, one small step toward the systemic change that was still desperately needed. Captain Hayes, who had attended the entire trial, approached Diana as the courtroom emptied. "Agent Phillips, I want you to know that we've implemented significant reforms in the Fairview PD, mandatory bias training, revised complaint procedures, body cameras with tamper-proof backup systems, and a civilian review board with real authority." Diana nodded. "That's a start, Captain. But real change requires more than policy updates. It requires a fundamental shift in culture, from protecting officers at all costs to protecting citizens and holding officers accountable when they abuse their authority." She looked at Maya, then back at Hayes. "My daughter should have been able to report a crime and expect to be taken seriously. Every citizen should have that expectation. Until that's the reality in every interaction with every officer, the work isn't done." 1 year after Officer Randy Blake's sentencing, the impact of that May afternoon in Fairview, Virginia, had rippled far beyond a single corrupt officer's downfall. The case had become a catalyst for change at local, state, and national levels. Maya Phillips, now 16, sat in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., invited to testify before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform about police accountability and the importance of taking civilian reports seriously. She wore a simple blue dress, her natural hair styled professionally, and spoke with the same calm clarity she'd shown that day in the parking lot. "When I called 911 to report armed suspects holding hostages, I did everything I was supposed to do," Maya testified, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I observed, I reported, I stayed safe, and I trusted that the responding officer would investigate. Instead, Officer Blake decided within seconds that I was lying. He made that decision based on my age and the color of my skin, and his prejudice nearly got people killed." She paused, looking directly at the assembled representatives. "But this isn't just about one bad officer. This is about systems that protect bad officers, that dismiss complaints, that allow patterns of abuse to continue for years." Officer Blake had 14 complaints filed against him over 12 years. Every single one was dismissed as unsubstantiated by his department. It took the FBI getting involved and my mother being a federal agent for anyone to take those complaints seriously. Representative Lisa Chin of California leaned forward. "Maya, what would you say to other young people who witness crimes but might be afraid to report them because they don't trust that police will take them seriously?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I'd say report it anyway. Document everything. Record if you can do so safely. Tell multiple people. And remember that one officer's failure to do their job doesn't mean the system is completely broken, it means we need to keep pushing for accountability until the system works the way it's supposed to." Her mother, Special Agent Diana Phillips, testified later that same day, providing the law enforcement perspective on the reforms needed. The Fairview Police Department is now operating under a federal consent decree, similar to what was implemented in Ferguson, Baltimore, and other departments with documented civil rights violations. But consent decrees shouldn't be the only path to reform. Departments need to proactively address problems before they reach crisis levels. Diana outlined the changes that had been implemented in Fairview and were now being adopted by police departments across the country: mandatory bias training with regular recertification, civilian review boards with subpoena power and access to all department records, early warning systems that flag officers showing patterns of problematic behavior, and revised use of force policies that prioritize de-escalation. Most importantly, Diana emphasized, we've established clear consequences for officers who abuse their authority and for supervisors who protect them. Officer Blake's misconduct continued for 12 years because his supervisors valued loyalty over accountability. That culture has to change. The reforms in Fairview had been dramatic and comprehensive. The police department had terminated 3 additional officers whose complaint histories showed patterns similar to Blake's. 5 supervisors, including a deputy chief, had been demoted or reassigned for failing to properly investigate complaints. The department had hired Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the criminologist who testified at Blake's trial, as a consultant to completely overhaul their training programs. Officer Justin Parker, who had witnessed Blake's misconduct and eventually found the courage to speak up, had been promoted to sergeant and was now leading the department's new accountability and ethics division. he'd implemented a duty-to-intervene policy that required officers to stop colleagues from using excessive force or violating citizens' rights, with protections against retaliation for officers who reported misconduct. The old culture was about protecting the badge at all costs, Parker explained during a training session with new recruits 6 months after Blake's sentencing. The new culture is about protecting the people we're sworn to serve. If you see another officer doing something wrong, you have a duty to stop it. That's not being disloyal, that's being a real cop. Mrs. Patricia O'Brien, who had survived the hostage situation that Blake failed to respond to, had become an advocate for crime victims' rights. She worked with the Fairview Community Coalition to establish a hotline for citizens who felt their emergency reports had been dismissed or mishandled by police. The hotline received 127 calls in its first 6 months, revealing just how widespread the problem had been. For years, people in our community didn't trust the police to take our concerns seriously, Mrs. O'Brien said during a town hall meeting. Maya Phillips's courage in standing up to Officer Blake, even when he threatened her, showed us that we don't have to accept mistreatment. We can demand accountability. The case had also sparked legislative action. The Virginia state legislature passed the Maya Phillips Act, requiring all law enforcement agencies in the state to implement body cameras with tamper-proof backup systems, establish civilian review boards, and create public databases of officer complaint histories. Similar legislation was pending in 12 other states. Tyler Mitchell, Maya's classmate who had recorded Blake's conduct on his phone, had been inspired to pursue a career in civil rights law. He was now a freshman at Howard University, majoring in political science with plans to attend law school. Seeing Maya stand up to that officer, seeing the FBI hold him accountable, seeing real change happen, it showed me that the system can work if people are willing to fight for justice, he explained during a college interview. The 2 armed robbers who had held Mrs. O'Brien hostage, Danny and his cousin Marcus, had both pleaded guilty and received reduced sentences in exchange for testimony about how they'd watched Officer Blake's initial response through the store window. We couldn't believe it, Danny testified. We were holding people at gunpoint, and the cop outside was threatening to arrest the girl who called it in. We thought we might actually get away with it until the FBI showed up. Their testimony had been crucial in demonstrating just how catastrophically Blake had failed in his duties, providing prosecutors with additional evidence of reckless endangerment. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the Fairview City Council held a special ceremony at Miller's Corner store, which had been temporarily renamed Maya's Place by locals who wanted to honor her courage. Mayor David Williams presented Maya with a commendation for civic bravery and responsible citizenship. Maya Phillips represents the best of what we want our young people to be, Mayor Williams said to the assembled crowd. She was observant, responsible, courageous, and committed to doing the right thing even when an authority figure tried to intimidate her. Because of her actions, lives were saved and a corrupt officer was finally held accountable. Diana stood in the crowd, watching her daughter accept the commendation with characteristic humility. She thought about that afternoon 1 year ago when she'd heard her daughter's voice on Officer Blake's body camera, calmly insisting she was telling the truth while Blake mocked and threatened her. She'd been terrified for Maya's safety, furious at Blake's conduct, and proud of her daughter's courage all at the same time. Now, watching the community celebrate Maya's actions and the reforms that had followed, Diana felt that same mixture of emotions plus something new, hope. Hope that the next teenager who reported a crime would be taken seriously. Hope that the next officer who witnessed misconduct would intervene instead of looking away. Hope that departments across the country were learning from Fairview's painful lessons and implementing reforms before federal intervention became necessary. After the ceremony, as Maya posed for photos with community members and local officials, she pulled her mother aside. "Mom, do you think anything we did actually mattered? I mean, Officer Blake is in prison, but there are thousands of officers like him in departments across the country. Did we really change anything?" Diana put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You changed everything for Mrs. O'Brien and those other hostages. You changed everything for the people who filed complaints against Blake over the years and were never believed. You changed everything for the kids in Fairview who now know they can report crimes without being dismissed or threatened. She paused, looking at the crowd of people who had gathered to honor Maya's actions. Social change doesn't happen all at once, Maya. It happens one case at a time, one reformed department at a time, one officer held accountable at a time. What you did mattered because you proved that courage and persistence can overcome prejudice and corruption. That's a lesson this community, and this country, desperately needed. As they walked back to their car, Maya asked one more question. Do you think Officer Blake learned anything from this? Do you think he understands why what he did was wrong? Diana considered that carefully. I don't know if Blake will ever truly understand the harm he caused. But I know that every officer who watched his case, who saw him go to prison for abusing his authority, learned that there are consequences for misconduct. And every young person who heard your story learned that they don't have to accept mistreatment from authority figures. Those lessons will ripple outward for years to come. They drove home through Fairview's streets, passing the police station where new recruits were being trained in constitutional policing and accountability, past the community center where the Civilian Review Board held its public meetings, past the courthouse where Blake had been sentenced. The town wasn't perfect. Prejudice hadn't disappeared overnight. There was still work to be done, progress to be made, reforms to be strengthened and expanded. But on that May afternoon 1 year ago, when a 15-year-old girl refused to back down even when a corrupt officer tried to intimidate her, something fundamental had shifted in Fairview, Virginia. Justice had prevailed. Accountability had been delivered. And a community had learned that change was possible when people had the courage to demand it. Maya Phillips had done exactly what her mother had taught her: see something, say something, and never stop fighting for what's right. And in doing so, she'd reminded everyone that real power doesn't come from a badge or a gun. It comes from truth, courage, and the unwavering belief that justice will eventually prevail. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any uploads.